Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Better Sex Podcast. This is Jessa, and I am glad you're here. Thanks for taking the time to visit and spend a little bit of time with me. Today, I'm doing another show about something that won't apply to as many of you as some of the shows, and yet it applies to everyone. So when I'm thinking in my work, in my therapy practice, in my online course, and even in this podcast, right? It's about how do any two people create a sex life that's easy and fun for both of them? And sometimes this means figuring out what pieces you've got and how you can put those together, right? Like what's working on any given day or in any given life or in any given part of stage of life, based on what has happened or what's going on with your physical functioning or I suppose your emotional functioning. Anyway, how do we put this together in such a way to maximize pleasure and connection? And this is a conversation I have with everybody, no matter what. And it's especially relevant if we're talking about people that are disabled or having any other sort of physical functioning issues, that are impacted. Because then we have to get creative, right? So today, my guest, Kate Wolovsky, is here, and she's disabled herself, and her partner is also. So they have a website called disabledduo.com. And she is involved in writing and research largely aimed at filling in this gap of knowledge, and not just about the sexual functioning for disabled people, but how providers can interact with these people, people that are disabled or have differences. What are the questions to ask? What kind of support do they need? How do these conversations happen? How can we support people to explore what's possible for them? Anyway, it's a fascinating conversation. And even if you are not disabled and no one you know is disabled, the concepts really are the same. And it's a valuable conversation to have in your own life. And I think it's really mind-opening to think about these ideas for when the day comes that you either have changes in your own functioning or someone in your life does. So let's open up the conversation. Let's explore this whole thing. Let's make it expansive and positive rather than limiting. And I hope you get a lot out of it. And before we start the show today, it is sponsored by Intimacy with Ease. It's a method to help otherwise happy couples achieve a sex life that is easy and fun for both of them, so that you can actually just enjoy your sex life with zero stress. For more information, if you want to watch a brief little training video that's available, all of that, go to intimacywithease.com. So, Kate, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks so much, Jessa. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. And it's,
me too. You've been on my radar for a while, and it took a little while to get it all scheduled and happening, but I'm glad we did.
Yeah. Well, thank you, COVID, for that. So.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you start by just sort of telling us a little bit about you and what you do and why you do it, how you came to do it, a little of the backstory.
But yeah, absolutely. Backstory. Here we go. So, my name is Kate. Pronouns, I go by a fairly vast array of pronouns, depending on whether I'm writing or not, but they, she, V, if I'm writing sometimes. For me, gender is, I experience my gender as undefinable, which is much been an experience of just over time coming home into my body, and very much guided and encouraged by my increasing disability throughout my years. So I am disabled. Mm-hmm. And I have multiple sclerosis. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I have primary immune deficiency, kind of like I call it a bouquet of things. I'm a collector.
Yeah.
And then it's about, I guess, maybe a little bit over 10 years ago, I had a bunch of MS exacerbations that really sort of advanced the diagnosis to secondary progressive MS. And I've used every type of mobility device so I was very sick for a while. And for me, that was actually one of the best things that could have happened to me because I'd kind of been struggling through my work at the time, which was not what I do now. And so it gave me the opportunity to kind of it wasn't necessarily planned, but it was sort of like a pause button on life and a chance to kind of like take a 3,000-foot view of what was going on. And so I've been a patient in multiple healthcare settings, obviously throughout that time. I've also, prior to about 10 years ago, I've also cared for other disabled people, elderly people in and out of hospitals, care homes, family members, and worked with them in terms of their body movement. But really getting that was really my MS diagnosis that really kind of brought me to a place where I realized, wow, I'm having a hard time getting the care that I actually need and being seen by my providers. And I ended up finding some really wonderful providers, but it was like finding a needle in a haystack. And definitely when it came to anything sexuality related, there was hardly any conversation.
Yeah.
So then I met my partner, my husband, Aaron, who is also disabled, hence us calling ourselves Disabled Duo. And this all came about really just because of individual experience and then my experience in counselor higher education. So I have my master's in counseling, and throughout that program, which was excellent, there was such a dearth of conversation around anything disability related. And so I started to do some research. I did some preliminary research, and I really started mapping the terrain of this sort of Grand Canyon that keeps us as educators and providers apart from understanding the vastly different array of sexual health, wellness, sexual pleasure opportunities that we experience as disabled people. So I kind of consider myself a translator. I'm sort of like, I'm the bridge to this. And also a researcher. So that the research came about because everything sort of came about because it was things I couldn't find.
Right. Okay. So how old were you when you first were having symptoms? I guess I'm wondering, were you an adult with an established, sexual experience and sex life that had to shift, or was this something that was hitting before puberty? Or
I did have disabilities. I probably had MS, way back to early childhood because of some of the symptoms I was experiencing. And it showed up. I'd had sex. I'd had other partners. I'd been married to somebody else. And I was hiding a lot. I was definitely experiencing sexual symptoms. I had urinary hesitancy, which at times, and for those who don't know, it's basically like sitting on the toilet and praying to pee, but you can't. And so, but it's also really important to just kind of relax and let it happen. So you kind of becomes like your living room, for a while. Yeah. But I didn't know that I needed to fully empty my bladder beforehand. I had chronic UTIs because of that.
Yeah.
And I also went through menopause prematurely because my pituitary gland stopped working. So I've had more or less of every hormone, and something that we would call internalized ableism, that experience of not feeling comfortable yet owning your disabled body it had always been there. And because I didn't have names for what was going on, and I'd been shifted around with other, attempts at diagnosis, and mostly, we have no idea what's going on with you. That also, and I think, for a lot of people, can lead to a lot of shame.
Yeah.
And so I was in shame, and I would hide some of the things I didn't even know were sexual, were related. I had no idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
And no one asked. The only conversation I ever had about my sexuality after my diagnosis was to tell me I wouldn't be able to have children. And
wow.
yeah, it was, that's, if anyone hears in the background, that's my little service dog, Lucy. She works with me and sometimes likes to snort or groan her agreement.
she wants to participate, get her comments in here, right?
Yeah, she does. So really, and my husband, and I've told this before, but this is the one that absolutely boggles my mind. When he was in a motorcycle accident, and so he has head to toe injuries and is permanently disabled himself. We have kind of our injuries are different, but they sort of mirror each other. So for him, it was instant. He went from totally functional to like all of a sudden complete change.
Yeah.
His life. So we share both of those experiences, kind of like, his experience would be similar to, say someone, it's not exactly the same thing as someone with a spinal cord injury, but there's he had a TBI.
Yeah.
Something we don't talk about enough, in terms of people's sexuality.
Right.
But crushed his pelvis and, he was in the hospital for 2 months and he got out, and his first doctor he saw, I hadn't met him yet. He went with his mother, and his mother says, his mother's just sitting there, and the doctor, the first thing she says is, "Does it work?" But I have to say, like, if I hadn't been through also the healthcare education side, I don't think I would have had the deep empathy for what we don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
And the education that we don't have. So that's kind of what led. I ended up writing a couple of papers on that gap, and that's how I'm also involved with the U.S. Association of Body Psychotherapy, and that's where I met Dr. Steve Porges, who's, for those who don't know, he's really the person who has explained from a neuroscientific and evolutionary perspective how stress works in our body and how traumatic stress works, what our body's response, what our lived experience is from an embodied perspective of living with the aftermath of a trauma, like the bags we carry.
Yeah. So not just the physical, effects of whatever this is, but the emotional and psychological ones.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the body does have a mind, and the mind lives in the body. So, and these two things are so connected. And if there's one thing that's become very clear during COVID for so many people is that, that these two things are so very connected.
Mm-hmm.
There can be, the more fear, anxiety, the more inflammation, the more exposure to, susceptibility, and then the reverse of for those who've had COVID and are now living with these symptoms that are so strange, and many of which are invisible to other people too, and just not really having an explanation for that. And, for me, that was, Dr. Porges had been at the Kinsey Institute, which is really an international, it's really considered like the international center for sex research, and our archives are quite extensive. And Alfred Kinsey, who developed the Kinsey scale of heteronormativity to homosexuality, which was just such a gift to all of us.
Right.
And so Kinsey did his work based on collecting histories from people that were very in depth. And it wasn't just what traumas happened to you. It wasn't just, check, you've had an assault. Check, you experienced depression. He asked people to tell their stories. Mm-hmm. And so the lab I work for is actually Dr. Porges' lab, and it's called the Traumatic Stress Research Consortium. And what we do is we take that approach that Kinsey took and we apply it to trauma. So we are looking at, of course, we can ask about the things that people live with, the events they've lived with, but also how is that affecting their autonomic nervous system? How, is their heart racing? Does their mouth feel dry? They have gastrointestinal symptoms, and these things we know get in the way of people's sex lives.
Yeah, and I would imagine two people have the same kind of event, they're going to respond differently, right? Not everybody's going to have the same level of traumatic stress or the same impacts from, in theory, the sort of same event, right? Two motorcycle accidents or two diagnoses of MS or two sexual assaults or whatever. It's
Yeah. Yeah. And that's so true. And it's such a sort of a melange, like a real mixture of things that can kind of like pile up, like when you stack papers on your desk and then you start to lose stuff.
right.
And then they sort of mound and then so sort of like that. Just the layers of it. And one thing that I really appreciate about some of the questionnaires that Dr. Porges developed years ago are that we don't need to ask about a traumatic event to know what the impact and the lived experience is of that person.
Mm.
We can look at what's going on with their autonomic nervous system. We can look at what's going on with their sexual health, their sexual wellness. If they're experiencing painful sex, sometimes there's no dissecting out which part is psychological, which part is how could we do that?
Right. And I'm curious about what are your thoughts about what can be sort of invisible disability or stress versus the very visible? I mean, because I'm able-bodied myself, but I've talked to some people where they've got something going on. It's some sort of autoimmune thing, or it looks invisible. I mean, certainly read posts on Facebook about you park in a handicapped spot without a visible disability and you get chewed out or whatever. But I'm just thinking the strain that. Not knowing necessarily what's wrong, maybe getting dismissed by medical, professionals and other people in your life, and the stress and the strain of having something that people don't understand versus like, wow, you broke your neck.
Yeah. Actually, it's funny because I often will say like it'd be so much easier if I could just be at times with certain symptoms. If you were just like bleeding, your arm was bleeding or something, and you could both look at it and you can both sense it. But even in that, we actually know from research that people respond differently to pain based on how their body's functioning and their own internal chemistry is a bit different. So as far as which is a disability, both are equally disabling. There's not even equally. I don't believe that there's any way of comparing. It's so subjective. And, I've watched people stub their toe and it really looks like they're going through a lot more pain than I am with my neuropathy. Even though it would be like if I take any of the pain questionnaires, like I'm always quite high, but I'm used to it. And so I think a lot of that is the stigma, and that's something we can all do as whether we are disabled or not, whether we call it disability, is just the assumptions. My colleague Manny Diaz, who works with me, calls them addumptions. So like it's just dumb to make assumptions.
Right.
And because those are, the expectations, the things that we place on people. And I've totally been through that thing with the handicapped parking spot.
Right.
And had people like approach me kind of aggressively about it. And, I think the truth is we can never know what's going on in a person's body unless
Right.
And at the same time, I think there's a few different sides to that. As a practitioner, a lot of us are literally disabled by lack of information.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, the people who are asking for care, hoping for care, may not know what they can ask us.
Yeah.
And so that's actually the biggest reason why I ended up more in the research, the consultation space, because of so many questions coming up. Like we see it in professional communities. People are wondering how to respond to some of these symptoms that have become like sort of like that. It's that Grand Canyon that I live in. Yeah.
So what's some of the advice or the approach that you recommend? Like how, no matter what kind of disability somebody might have or whatever kind of traumatic stress they're living with, what are some of the things you advocate?
Well, first of all, disabled people are really sexy. I just like to state that. And many of us know our bodies really, really well. I would say that definitely as my symptoms progressed, I'm now figured out a way to kind of, keep them within a range. But that took me a few years to sort of figure out what I needed. Mm-hmm. But in that process, I grew more and more at home in my body. And same thing, even though my husband, it was overnight, same thing for him is like, right. Both are, sex is so much more amazing, and it doesn't have to be penetrative sex. I think there's a lot of ideas. I think one of the biggest things is the kind of like putting aside the assumptions. So like assumption number one is like, can disabled people have sex? Yes, mm-hmm. We absolutely can. And we love it. And we need to sometimes rework things and do it differently. We need right. communication. So on the one hand, as disabled people, we need support to be able to have those conversations, to be invited into them with the genuine intention to discover what we need instead of curiosity.
Yeah, right. Like titillating voyeurism or something, right? Like just, yeah.
In my clinical work, I've seen it all the time where, people come in and they've had, therapists who just didn't quite understand how to talk to them about it, or felt another common assumption is that, oh, well, and this is more from the provider side is, oh, we need to get you through this and then we'll deal with it. So, for example, right now during COVID, what do we see? Like a lot of my colleagues at Kinsey are doing some amazing, amazing research about people's sex lives right now. And what are we finding? We're finding that there are higher rates of intimate partner violence. We're finding that some people are breaking up. Some people are hooking up more. And some people also are getting really creative. So that last piece is a really good, get creative.
Right.
Piece of advice. But, bottom line is we don't know enough yet. I can tell you from my own experience, I think that, the best thing is for us all to hear each other, whether it's providers, family members, hospitals, organizations, or disabled people, all of those people kind of need to hear from each other. And so we just launched a study of Body, Mind, and COVID-19, an inclusive survey by diverse people for diverse people. And that was actually meant to address, we started it before COVID. So we worked on it.
So it didn't have COVID in the name at first, I imagine.
We were looking at embodied experiences and also looking at how can we ask questions in a way that welcomes the experience of people with diverse experiences. And, it was a lot of, it's sort of learning and unlearning at the same time. It's going, wait a second, does this question work for you? So I went around and interviewed tons of people from tons of different backgrounds. It started as a disability thing, but it grew and grew and grew. And I asked sort of all parties, what do you need providers to know? What do you need the world to know? What are we not asking? And what do you not like about surveys? What is it that would invite you to share? And so, it's been an amazing process. And I hope everyone listening will take it, because my role is in knowing this territory is to explain the fact that it's okay. We don't know. And it's okay, you're not okay. But my role is to give people an opportunity to talk and then come back and share it with them. So, training and education for the providers and for the patients too. Right. How to arrive at more meaningful conversations so that you come in, I come into the doctor and I hear how's your sex life?
Yeah.
How's everything going for you? How's your sexual health? Do you experience pleasure? Same thing. Yeah. Same thing for everyone, really, I think.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, it's Jessa here, taking just a quick break. Thanks for listening so far. I wanted to let you know about the sex quiz that I've put together called How Healthy is Your Sex Life? I've taken a close look at the typical ways that I see couples get into trouble with sex, including avoidance, neglect, negativity, distraction, and boredom. And the free quiz will score your individual results based on these factors. And then I provide my recommendations and ideas, including my top 10 sex tips, which will help you make instant improvement. If you'd like to take the quiz and see how healthy your sex life is, you can do it right now at sexhealthquiz.com.
And what about, you talk about accessing sexual pleasure, right? Accessing sexual health. What is...
Yeah.
I use some of that terminology too, but I'm curious about, choosing accessing or how that applies.
Yeah. So, there's kind of like two main words that are given when we talk about disability, at least in, mostly North American culture. We talk about accommodations sometimes, which I say like accommodations are for hotels.
Right.
It sort of makes it seem like someone's doing you a favor. And so, that's a word I would like to see changed because it can lead to actually preventing access for some people. Mm. And so access is just what the word means. It's sort of like, can you access something? Can I have that experience? And what is getting in the way? Now that can be a number of things. Sometimes it's our own internalized shame, internalized ableism, fear of talking, fear of, is it okay to talk to my partner? Is that a welcoming conversation? And fear of speaking to a provider. And on the provider side, really, the majority have told me either, oh, that's your job. You do that. I don't do that. Or I don't have time. Or I really don't know how to ask.
Yeah.
And, the truth is you ask the same way you do for non-disabled.
Well, but then we've got the whole issue of so many medical providers don't ask about sex even with able-bodied people, right? Like, I can't remember what the stat is, but it's huge that people don't know. They don't ask about sex at all, no matter who it is.
But that's so true. Our own ASECT member, Dr. Peggy Kleinplatz, teaches at University of Ottawa, and she teaches doctors about sex and how to ask. But even then, we were having a conversation, a couple of years ago, and even then, there's only so much that you can do and squeeze into the curriculum.
Yes.
I think it's more just that, and this is part of the access thing, is it's sort of like it takes a village. And it's about sort of like, how can we create a collaborative care community for each person so that if a doctor can't talk about it, they know to ask and they know where to refer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or they know at least that there's a resource. And so that makes it an accessible conversation to have.
Right.
Because for the provider who's going like, wow, okay, I've got 5 minutes. I know I need to make sure that this person isn't about to have a heart attack or bleed to death. So it's like, how do we start those conversations? Some of that starts with the intake form. Some of that starts even beforehand.
Right.
So that's a lot of the time where Manny and I do a whole different range of events, which now are moving more online. Like we've done a pelvic floor health workshop that was just inclusive of all bodies and for providers, but also for anyone with those experiences to come in. And really we did it because I needed more people to refer to. and so it's like, but then, we make connections, people in different specialties. I think so for providers, it's like reach outside of your toolbox and lean on our toolbox.
Right.
And think about, think about your office. How accessible is that? And have you given the person an opportunity to ask for something else? Mm-hmm. Do you have a way of getting someone who's a wheelchair user onto a table for an internal exam? Or these are some things that don't happen.
Right.
And now during COVID, there's a whole nother layer of access, which I think is really important to note for everyone. And, I would really encourage anyone who's listening, who's a disabled person or anyone who's kind of afraid to seek care. If something comes up, a lot of us are working online and there are ways to get some information. And at the same time, that's also for providers to really think about how they're making things safe for that disabled person if they need care.
Yeah. So I'm wondering what applies to everybody is my question. Because one of the things I have, my work as a sex therapist, so, if I see an elderly couple or somebody that's had some sort of cancer treatment or sexual dysfunction of some sort, the kinds of creativity that they have to discover. I mean, there's so much that they have to do that would be beneficial to everybody, even if your body's working perfectly, right? So I know it's the same thing. Like, what would you emphasize out of what's so important for disabled people around sexuality that really everybody should be thinking about and doing?
Got it. Yeah. Actually, I often get, like, even when Erin and I have spoken, we've had people come up to us and say, this is the same for everyone.
Exactly. Right.
Consent, and kind of like, in the kink community, there's a really wonderful approach to consent and discussion in terms of sort of like contractual arrangements of who does what when, like, talking about what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of people with disabilities have fear about, a certain symptom interfering with, especially when it's not visible.
Right.
And sometimes so I would say, talk about it, have really open conversations. People with autism as well, in particular, people with trauma histories are going to need to know, like, hey, talk about what you like. That can be sexy. It doesn't have to be not sexy. That can be a real turn on, it really can. And, talk about, and if whatever parts of your body that you can explore. And if you can't, you can explain that to your partner. So my disabilities, I'm kind of up and down with what's working, what's not working. So literally with Erin, I'll say, like, okay, so what's working with you today?
Right. What's on the menu today and what's had to come off, right?
Exactly. It's like, with the other night, my back was hurting. I'm like, well, I can lift up my arm like this. And if you can fit yourself in there, we're good. Or sometimes we can't get up and move across the room to each other. Sometimes we can, and I know I've said this many times before, we make a lot of pillow forts. So innovation, definitely, like think outside of every box you ever knew.
Yeah.
And reimagine even what your room is like, how you set things up. Just because a coffee table goes in a living room doesn't mean a coffee table has to be in a living room. There's all kinds of things that you can do that may not be a disability aid. Most of us are kind of MacGyvers of getting around things. So, like, for example, we have I'm actually designing a new bed frame for us because Erin is the inventor and builds things, but I took sort of like gym bars and kind of turned them into a headboard. So that gives us things to grab onto and hold on to. It's much better than a bed cane. And it makes for the most amazing whole wide world.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's playful. I mean, it's playful to think of something like that. I mean, it was even sexy to see him working on it for, like, however long he worked on it for. And so, for people who can't be together right now, who are at a distance, also reimagine what Zoom can look like. Like, we don't have to be like talking heads, like,
right.
Like all, alert, like, get it, emote to the camera, like pull your laptop into a hug and snuggle it. And it's really kind of about, it's just unlearning the things that we think we know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing I'm getting from you is, trying to shed the shame.
Yeah.
And the disappointments and the sense of failure or broken or inadequate, for anybody, and get back to where this is just fun and we're sexy and this is, anything we create can be good. Right? Yeah. There's not some standard to hold ourselves to.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I would definitely say, don't count on Instagram to tell you what your body should look like, because the only thing that your body should look like is your body.
Yeah.
And all bodies are very, very different and extremely different. In fact, another colleague of ours, Magali Perrot in Montreal, has a new company, Sex Ed Plus, and she's making these amazing, pardon me if those pronouns are incorrect, it might be they, are making like silicone molds of different types of genitalia and photos of the vast variation in people's genitalia so that we can understand. And for people with intellectual disabilities or people with, people who are blind, it's wonderful to have those as teaching aids to kind of feel into it. And so that kind of goes for just about everyone, is kind of the shame, the expectations of what our bodies do, particularly for people with vulvas and vaginas, and for those who ejaculate, that can cause, that's like waterworks. And it's fun. It's really fun. But some people have shame around that. And in that type of an orgasm, it can feel like you're about to poop. And that's how you know it's going to be, that's how you know it's coming. But for many people also who may have some neurological loss of sensation in that area, may not know. And so Erin's advice is, once you poop the bed once, and then it's good. You get used to it.
Get it over with. Yeah.
I often recommend, thank you to dogs and people who want to buy a lot of things for them. There are wonderful blankets on Amazon that are waterproof and yet soft. Keep a bunch of those around, and it's okay. Whatever your body does, it's a body.
Yeah. So could you tell us a little bit about how people can get in touch with you and follow your work? Or you even said participate in the survey, right? Like, where do people go?
Yeah. Okay. So, first of all, yes, please do consider taking the survey, whoever you are. You don't have to be disabled. You can be a practitioner, anyone. It's international as well. So, anywhere you are in the world. And if you'd like to help us translate it into your language, let me know. But you can go to our website, which is disabledduo.com. So it's 2 Ds, disabled, and then duo.com. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Disabled Duo. And occasionally the Kinsey Institute will also post links to our survey. The survey link, probably best to find it on social media, but maybe in your show notes as well.
Yeah.
There's a bit.ly link to shorten it. And so that's probably best done. And you can follow us there. I think, that this survey is a great opportunity for people to tell us what you need other people to know.
Yeah.
Tell us about your experience, and so we're isolated, many of us physically. Like, this is a great time to share what you need, because, as sex therapists, we can, that's the information we need to know.
Right.
And as sex educators, that's the type of thing that we also need to know, because we can talk to your providers. And that's, so if you're a provider, I'm happy to work with you. If you're a patient, I'm happy to work with you. We customize trainings a lot of times, because every organization is different. Mm-hmm. But yeah, anything that we can do to kind of come together in that conversation, please do reach out, and Manny or I'll get back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Jessa. It's really an honor to be on the show, and I so appreciate your work, and anything that talks about how to have better sex.
Right, it's a good thing in my book. So.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get to know you and question and answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.